Well, good evening. Good evening and welcome to our kickoff event for the 15th Georgia Writers Hall of Fame celebration. I'm Toby Graham, the University Librarian and Associate Provost, and it is a pleasure to have you here at the library tonight. In the morning at 10 a.m., we will officially induct Roy Blount Jr. and Bill Shipp, and posthumously Brainerd Cheney, Catherine Dupree Lumpkin, and James Allen McPherson into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. It's so wonderful to have all of our inductee and so many of the family members of our other inductees with us here tonight. Very special evening, and what a better way to kick off the celebration than this evening with Roy Blount Jr. I'd like to extend a special welcome and thank you to, we have our members of the library's Board of Visitors with us, and if you're a member of the library's Board of Visitors, or if you're a member of the Georgia Review Board, please just stand up for 1 second, because I just want to acknowledge you for the hard work that you all do, and thank you for being here. This is a group of people that we're just so thankful for what they do to help the libraries as we pursue excellence in service to the university and to the state and well beyond. So introducing Roy tonight is Dr. Hugh Ruppersberg. Dr. Ruppersberg is the Emeritus University Professor of English and Senior Associate Dean here at UGA. He's also a member of the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame Board of Judges. Dr. Ruppersberg.
Good afternoon. I feel very honored to be able to introduce to you a writer who since around 1970 has been a prominent journalist, humorist, sports writer, novelist, dramatist, newspaper and magazine columnist, radio and television actor, screenwriter, and poet. I'm speaking, of course, of Roy Blount, and you've already heard that he'll be inducted into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame tomorrow morning. Mr. Blount was born in Indianapolis, but raised in Decatur, Georgia. He began his career as a newspaper journalist in the late 50s, earned degrees from Vanderbilt and Harvard University, worked for several years for the Atlanta Journal, served 2 years in the Army, was a staff writer for Sports Illustrated, and for the last 40 years has been an independent writer who has published in that time some 23 books of commentary, humor, fiction, and history. These include a book about Robert E. Lee, I was surprised to learn that, and another, perhaps presciently, about the first woman president. He's been published in virtually every American magazine I can think of. He's been anthologized everywhere. 2 of his best-known books are About 3 Bricks Shy of a Load, which is about the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it's been called by Jonathan Yardley, book critic for the Washington Post, who's not easy to please, one of the best 10 books about sports ever written. And another book, Crackers, and the entire title of that is Crackers, this whole many-angled thing of Jimmy Moore Carter's ominous little animals, sad singing women, my daddy and me. He's written many other distinctive books since then. He appears frequently on Prairie Home Companion. I saw him last week present comments about Bill Murray at the Mark Twain Prize ceremony at the Kennedy Center. Let me make this clear, I saw it on TV. He has also, and this is very important, written the best and perhaps the only poem about grits I've ever read. Roy Blount is one of the most important and active figures in American writing, journalism, and humor at work today. I'm very pleased to present him to you. He's going to speak on the subject of where I'm coming from. Mr. Blount?
Thank you, Hugh and Toby and everybody and all my family and people. And wife. It's really refreshing to be immortalized. What they always said about members of the Baseball Hall of Fame, that they were baseball immortals. And, frankly, we'll be truthful with you right now, that was the Hall of Fame to which I, as a Georgia boy, aspire. But now that I'm here, I realize that I would much rather be in a Hall of Fame with Flannery O'Connor than with Ty Cobb. Even though, in fact, Ty Cobb was not the nasty guy, as nasty a guy as he's been made out to be. There's a new, or a couple of years ago, biography by Charles Learson of Ty Cobb, which makes the point, for instance, very convincingly with meticulous research, that Ty Cobb was not anymore, in fact, maybe a little less racist than anybody else in his time. There was a famous incident of him beating somebody up kind of savagely, and it was more and more in the histories in the condemnation of the kind of awful guy Ty Cobb was. It says that this was a black man, but it turns out there's no evidence at all that that this was a black guy. In fact, just going from the press accounts, it seems that he was some white guy that Ty Cobb wanted to beat up. Of course, being from Georgia, if I talk about how Ty Cobb is not as racist as people want to make him out to be, people would just say, I'm from Georgia. Of course I would think Ty Cobb is not as racist. But I'm happy for Ty Cobb to be as racist. I'm not happy, I'm just willing for Ty Cobb to be factually racist. That's something I would like to sort of, this is going to be kind of a disjointed, these remarks. Maybe not, who knows, but one thing I want to talk about is the pressure of being from Georgia, and going up north. When the main people forming my character include prominently my mother, who was not from Georgia. She was from my Georgia roots are very sort of shallow because I was born in Indianapolis, and then we moved to Columbus, Ohio, and then we moved to Decatur, Georgia when I was 18 months old. But my father was from North Florida, Panhandle, Florida. My mother was from Mississippi, sort of, mid-Mississippi, sort of not very interesting, not the Delta where we if God knows how much I would drink if my mother was managed to do pretty well, even though my mother was from sort of Protestant, Piney Woods, teetotaling Mississippi. So they were not from Georgia, but we did move to Georgia when I was very young, and we were. And my mother, people ask me why. It's a terrible question to be asked because it assumes, people say, why are you funny? And first of all, you should probably say, funny? I'm not funny. What do you mean funny? I'm not trying to be funny. Because you got to, as long as once it gets to be self-conscious and aware that you're trying to be funny. I'm always trying to dodge the notion that I'm trying to be funny. But here's why I am funny. I am sometimes funny, and this is why. My mother, we had when I was already had moved up to New York. All right, let me go back a little bit. We'll save my mother for later. Believe me, she's worth it. I had various Georgians have influenced me. One Georgian, early Georgian, whom my mother introduced me to, was Joel Chandler Harris, also a Georgia writer immortal who unfortunately has passed away. lots of, I guess immortal is sort of a loose term, but I choose it to mean that I'm not ever going to die. But Joel Chandler Harris did. They didn't have the same medical, Anyway, but my mother taught me to read by reading to me, among other things, and she taught me to read before I went off to school, before I went to first grade. So I had that going for me. And she read to me from the Uncle Remus stories. Now, the Uncle Remus, as long as as Uncle Remus and the little kid character are talking to each other, it's awkward. The venerable darky and the little white kid. But once Uncle Remus kicks into telling his stories, they are great stories which blend African roots and a white Southern storyteller who figured out. The stories came from this real black man named I don't know what his real name was, but that gives you some idea. Not only did he not get any royalties, but we don't know what his name was. But Joel Chandler Harris did figure out how to spell those things. Things like to be sure, Toobyshow, Toobysho, or to be sure. And what was the other one? Anyway, he figured out how to, what I've always liked about Southern literature is that it tries to capture on the page the sounds of talk. That's why I always liked Roger Miller better than Bob Dylan. Because Roger Miller does write songs, for instance, Fjont Me To. There's a song, I'll come back to you, Fjont Me To. I don't know how he spells it, but that's how people say Fjont Me To. I wish I had your good luck charm and you had to do wakadoo wakadoo. Combination is sort of absurd, do wakadoo wakadoo, but it's also if you had to do what I had to do or something. I just love that, to get in sort of the underlayer. The other one I was going to remember from Uncle Remus and Joel Chandler Harris was Bime By, B-I-M-E-B-Y, meaning by and by. I don't know whether I was thrilled by that spelling at the time or not, but I do, because I was looking at over my mother's shoulder, and by and by just seemed to me a miracle, because I love dictionaries, and I believe in looking stuff up and knowing how to spell things right, but you can also spell better than the dictionary. So, you can get down deeper than the dictionary, or at least, get down to where language is not just an abstract thing, but a thing that issues from the human body. I was just thinking, somebody asked me the other day, said, why does the word B-U-R-Y, why is that pronounced berry? And the word J-U-R-Y is pronounced jury. And I'm sure there's some long etymological history for that, but you can't say bury very well. And if you say j, then the U flows right out of your mouth, jury. Whereas it's not all in the mouth, but some of it's in the brain, but lots of it is in the mouth. And that goes all the way back to me and Joel Chandler Harris, my fellow Georgia immortal. It really is kind of cool. The more I think about this, the cooler it seems. Lots of other, Ray Charles is not not this in this category, but Ray Charles is from Georgia, and he, like Joel Chandler Harris, similarly, pulled together a fusion of African American and white, what are you going to call it, Crackro American culture. There's this great thing, Flip Wilson, comedian Flip Wilson, was talking about being Christopher Columbus, and Christopher Columbus goes to Queen Isabella to get financing to go to America, and afterwards Queen Isabella is going along saying, Chris gonna go to America. I shouldn't do it. I'm not trying to say. Chris gonna go to America. Chris gonna find Ray Charles. That pretty much sums up America Ray Charles was from Georgia. Another person from Georgia who, I had all sorts of teachers. Well, I had trying to get all these things in order, but my high school English teacher, Ann Lewis, was a great inspiration for me because she did two things. First of all, I had no idea of being a writer. I was planning, in fact, to be a three-sport immortal, not just baseball. But I had died off gradually in every sport already. I was 16 years old, and I had 15. So she was my sophomore English teacher, and she suggested that I might want to be a writer only because, I can imagine teachers just live under the drudgery of reading student papers. But if you have one crazy student in the class who will write about, and doesn't care, and just will write about his own pencil instead of what he's supposed to write about, it no doubt freshens up the class. And so that's what I would do. I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I didn't want to write what I was supposed to write, but I never wanted to write what I was supposed to write. I still don't want to write what I'm supposed to write. And I just hate the idea of writing what I'm supposed to write, even if I believe in it. I kind of want to have to bend it a little bit, just to make sure it bounces and doesn't just go. Because if you write what you're supposed to write, even if it's right, it just sort of goes, okay, yeah, But if you can make it bounce, then it might catch on. Anyway, my high school English teacher, gave me a huge stack of New Yorker magazines. I remember it was like, I don't know whether you ever had this feeling, but occasionally when I was a kid, I would trade comic books, like Batman comics and stuff, and I would come home with a whole new stack of Batman comics and Superman comics that I hadn't read before. It was just like being rich, and Little Lulu comics. I just loved, I love Little Lulu. And just to have that wealth of you just sort of sit there and look at it. I just read these forever. It's like being immortal almost. But she gave me all these a stack of New Yorker magazines. Now, I lived in Decatur, Georgia. It was my great good fortune. I doubt at that time there was anybody else in Decatur. Maybe I'm selling Decatur short, but now, of course, everybody in Decatur has gotten much hipper than the New Yorker. I mean, when you grow up in a smallish town, you expect to come back to it sort of, condescendingly and nostalgic. And, oh yeah, these are good, solid folks. Now I come back and they are much more sophisticated than I am, which is embarrassing. I thought maybe they would put a statue. In fact, my father, there is in fact a plaque to my father. My father was one reason I had to leave Decatur was because my father was Mr. Decatur. I mean, he was the pillar of the community without which the community would have collapsed, and he was a great man. And there is in fact a plaque to my father in the town square, Decatur Square. It says, to Roy A. Blount, builder of homes, which is interesting because his father was a carpenter. He worked with his hands, but during the Depression, the only work that my paternal grandfather had was to board up houses that had been foreclosed. And so he told me, even though my father loved to do work with his hands and loved building stuff, he got talked out of it by his father. He loved, my father used to go down to the basement to get away from the rest of us, of course. Also, when he got home from work, he had all these little bitty drawers of little widgets and little nuts and bolts and things that I never sufficiently appreciated. And he would be down there humming tunelessly, and he'd have one long bolt stirring up some other bolts, and you could just hear him rattling down there. And and that's the way. That's the way I like words. That's the way I like, just sort of stir them up and not even care about what they do necessarily right away, but just appreciate them as words. And that was his his bliss. I hate to use that term, but he couldn't be a carpenter because his father talked him out of it, because his father, my father, in fact, worked 3 jobs. He was the oldest in the family, oldest child, and he worked 3 jobs and would bring home his pay and put it out on the dining room table, and everybody would share it. And he never really had a childhood because of the Depression, because he had to work. My mother never had a childhood, really, because she was an orphan and bounced from relative to relative, and was never, her had this interesting mental health history, which is that my maternal grandfather died in the Jackson, Mississippi insane asylum, and my paternal grandparents met while working in the Chattahoochee, Florida insane asylum. I think they were working there. Anyway, but because of my mother's mother died when my mother was very young, and her father died too, and died. My mother would always talk about people being raving maniacs and blithering idiots and things. And her father probably was a raving maniac. But my mother was different. We'll get back to my mother. But so they both had, both parents both came up hard, and they wanted my childhood to be perfect, which and I didn't want it to be perfect. So it wasn't. So anyway, but somehow from I think I derived lots of my love of words from my mother. She used a lot of expressions. She would talk about. I was just looking back in one of these books, one of my books today. She would say things like, "You don't eat enough to physic a jaybird." I don't remember her saying that, but apparently she did, because I wrote it in the book. Physic a jaybird. I mean, nobody talks like that anymore. She was always talking about different gaits. People traipsing along and moseying. Well, we better mosey on and stuff. Maybe y'all still talk about that like that, but I don't think so. I don't hear people using expressions like that. Grinning like a mule eating briar. And that's the kind of thing that helped make me a writer. It's just loving words, and realizing that you could use words that those expressions always sounded just a little like you weren't supposed to use them. Because we weren't on the farm anymore, and yet we had all these expressions involving farm animals and all kinds of other animals. I don't know, but it was a heritage that I probably don't deserve. I don't have a mule, and I don't really know any blue jays, jaybirds, all that well. But anyway, I lived in Decatur, Georgia, and my Ann Lewis, my 10th grade English teacher, may well have been the only person in Decatur who subscribed to the New Yorker. And she gave me these huge stacks. I mean, literally, I guess she had saved all of her New Yorkers. And she gave them to me. And I read them and decided that's what I would be. I decided I would be, all the people like James Thurber and S.J. Perlman and Robert Benchley. They became my heroes. And I wanted to be, and I was just impressed by how much everybody in New York seemed to know. I assumed that everybody in the New Yorker knew everything that was in the New Yorker. Years later, I was to learn that a lot of them didn't even know where Memphis was. Literally, didn't know where Memphis was. Where is Memphis? I've heard of Memphis. You don't know where Memphis is? Jesus Christ. If I had known that they didn't know where Memphis was, I probably would not be a writer today, because I was inspired to know what they know what all they knew. And I went on eventually to write for the New Yorker, but the New Yorker does not. Things like by and by do not work in the New Yorker. You have to spell right in the New Yorker. They don't want to know anybody to think they can't spell. So I enjoy, and I have a lot of great friends at the New Yorker, and it feels sort of a tiny part of New Yorker history. But I realized that, and so I sort of shifted back, and I realized that I could do more as a Southern writer than as a New Yorker writer. I edited a book called Southern Anthology, my book of Southern humor, and sort of that's my of all the books I've done. I think that's seems to me a real accomplishment is to pull together all kinds of humor on the page, from Joel Chandler Harris to Bessie Smith to you know, Randall Jarrell. There's such a people think of Southern humor as you know, hee-haw. Think of it. I like hee. Actually, you go back. Hee-haw is pretty funny. Sometimes it is. You know, Junior Samples. What's the one? Junior Samples was a famous one. He's sitting under a tree and said he was feeding the pigs by holding them up to the apple tree, and pigs just eat the apple off a tree. And somebody said, well, wouldn't it take a lot less time to just get the apples down and feed them to the pig? And he said, oh, what's time to a pig? But Southern humor is a broad thing, and so I'm glad to be a part of Southern humor. But it's I always, you know, but I don't want to lapse into sort of obvious Southern humor. I mean, let's see if I can remember Jill McCorkle said something about Southern literature. She said, when it's Goober up in the Chinaberry tree yelling down at Meemaw and Peepaw, I'm out of there. Talking about Southern literature in general, and I feel that way about Southern humor. Though Goober can be pretty funny. I was in a restaurant in, I think it was the Blue and White restaurant in Tupelo, Mississippi. And there's another one called Mendenhall's or something. Just I don't know. But it had the flat catfish. I can't remember for sure which one, but I was with Joan, my wife, who I'm sorry, who loves Southern stuff, even though she's from God knows where. We were down there in this restaurant, and there was this big table of people, and maybe 8 people, and pretty much half of them were black and half of them were white. And they were just laughing so hard. And one of them was saying, I said, Ginger, you got to get down off the windshield because I can't hardly see to drive. And everybody was just rolling around. They were just laughing so hard. It was such a wonderful time. And it was probably something they hadn't ought to be laughing at. Didn't sound like a sensible practice to. There should probably have. There should be an organization against people being up on the windshield while other people are trying to drive. But God knows there's all sorts of terrible things going on in the South all the time, and if you can somehow laugh at them, it doesn't. Oh, I don't know. I'm not justifying anything. Like I say, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of resistance in the South to everything. Every time you go to say something, you think, well, on the other hand, you know. Okay, but anyway, all this New York stuff. I thought I got to get to New York, where nobody, you know, every this was back in the 60s, late. I graduated from high school in '59, so the late '50s, and every white Southern guy you saw on television was chasing somebody with an accent, you know, and that's not my idea of, you know, what I aspired to. I thought I'll get to New York, and there I'll be among people who are, you know, of course, when I got to New York, they would all ask me about, they had a problem with their truck. And now, of course, it's sort of flipped around where the most famous person who appeals to the Ku Klux Klan is from New York. Takes a little bit of pressure off of me, I hope. But so I thought about going to New York, but that's something I got out of my another Georgian, my high school English teacher, Ann Lewis. God, I don't know that I would have been a writer if it hadn't been for her. So who did we talk about? We talked about who's it? Oh, and then one big thing is that Ann Lewis actually took me to meet Flannery O'Connor. Yeah, it was the year before she died, just about a year, August of '63, I guess. And because Ann Lewis had gotten to know Flannery O'Connor by, she had gotten her master's from Emory, I think, and had written a dissertation on Flannery O'Connor and had started a correspondence with her, and she took me down to Milledgeville to meet Flannery O'Connor. And I met Flannery O'Connor's peacocks. I met her donkey, whose name was Ernest. I forget why his name was Ernest. Certainly not for Hemingway, I don't think. I don't know. And she told me a story. This is a story that she told me two things. She said she had talked to a man who had eaten an owl. He had shot and eaten an owl. And she said, "What does owl taste like?" And he said, "About like crow." She also said she had talked to somebody who talked about a screech owl. He said, "You mean a screech owl?" I said, No, screech owl. Screech owl is one of those owls that will land down on the next to another little bird on the limb of a tree and scooch it over and scooch it over. But she was very gracious. We had sherry. I can count her among the many authors I have drunk with. We had sherry, and her mother was sort of hovering in the background, and she said she didn't like, somebody was dismayed to hear she didn't like, I forgot, but she, right. But she was, so I actually met Flannery O'Connor, and I was too shy to write her a letter. I wish I had. But, so I met her with Ann Lewis, and Flannery O'Connor, it's hard for me to, Flannery O'Connor is really funny, but also really scary. And that's it. I love that. No, I'm not as good as Flannery O'Connor, I'll tell you right now. If you were thinking about reading me, just skip over me and read some more Flannery O'Connor. But because I grew up in the talking about pressure, religious pressure. This is sort of life, Flannery O'Connor often wrote that religion should be a matter of life or death. And to my mother, it was. So there was that, and Flannery O'Connor deals with that, she's funny and just deals with the notion of, what's holy and what's scary and what's final and what's what we all ought to be worried about at a really profound level. And it's just, she writes stuff that, almost gets to the point of, I don't believe I'd have told that. I always wanted to get very close to that, or even just get over into that whole area of, I don't believe I'd have told that. And just jerk it out of, jerk it away from anybody else's condescension by making it so funny and well put that you should have told it. So Flannery O'Connor was a real inspiration to me in some kind of way. I don't really I don't write like her very much, but she raised the bar of how funny and how seriously funny you could be. Then my great friend in college, Flannery O'Connor was asked once, she said once, "I'm constantly being asked, do the universities not suppress, what was the verb? The universities stifle. Do universities stifle the writer? And she said, I always say they don't stifle enough of them. And she also said, I found that everybody thinks they know about stories until they sit down and try to write one. And both of those times, I mean, the first time, I mean, I could read that and think, I like that. I like the idea that Flannery O'Connor was rejecting all these other writers. Somehow or another, I don't know where it came from, but I would read that and think, she's not talking about me. Why? I don't know why. I wasn't that good, but somehow I thought I was. And so I just pursued, you know, I had the, felt like I had the somehow could get away with it. I don't know. But then I went to college, went to university, and there I had my second great teacher who is here with us tonight. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm acting like this. My friend Roy Blount, who just was a great model of gladly would he learn and gladly teach. And once he did a lecture in the aesthetics course. It's a lot of different lectures, and he talked about how some critic had referred to a bicycle pump in a story by James Joyce. I forget the story, but this critic maintained that the bicycle pump was a symbol for the Holy Spirit. And Breen said, no. Bicycle pump is not the Holy Spirit. The bicycle pump is a bicycle pump. And but things can be sort of, you know, and he talked about organic symbolism. For instance, the train that runs over Anna Karenina is a symbol, but it's also a train. I mean, and you can see how it sort of represents other forces in the culture, her culture that led to her being run over. I've oversimplified that lecture considerably, but it helped me somehow or another. Just I remembered it, and just so I mean I realized that being taught how to read and considering critics' notions of how to read, you didn't have to take anybody's word for anything. You just had to think. Well, maybe a bicycle pump. I know what a bicycle pump is like. And if somebody mentions a bicycle pump, I have enough sense to see whether, in fact, it does sort of represent the Holy Spirit, and I don't think it does. I don't know much about the Holy Spirit, but I have read Flannery O'Connor, and I did know my mother, and so I have a feeling that it's something I should not tamper with too much, and I should bear in the back of my mind, and it also puts a lot of pressure on me somehow or another. The Holy Spirit, I don't go to church or anything like that, but the Holy Spirit, stuff like the Holy Spirit, always seemed to me kind of scary and empowering. I don't know how to talk about it. I've done a lot of undermining of myself. I wrote, for instance, Hugh mentioned my biography of Robert E. Lee. There was a series of Penguin Lives. The Penguin publisher had a series of different writers writing brief biographies of different people. And they came to me and said, would you write a brief biography of Mark Twain? It is like just perfect, because I've never been a good brander. You know, that would have been great branding for me. You know, people associate me with Mark Twain. That's cool. But I just didn't want to do it somehow or another. I had this voice saying, I don't know whether it was the Holy Spirit. I don't know where the voice was. Somehow, but Flannery O'Connor or somebody, I don't know, saying, that's awful. I think anybody. Mark, oh, cool, okay, you'll do well with that. You'll go into there. But I said, no, I don't know. Somehow I don't want to do that. And said, well, how about some other Southern icon? And just off the top of my head, I said, how about Robert E. Lee? And 4 years later, 4.5 years later, I mean, it took longer than the war. I managed to write about Robert E. Lee. But, and, you know, I had two things. The reason I persisted, I really wanted to do this, was, first of all, I found out something about Robert E. Lee's sense of humor, which I don't know whether I remember or not. But he, two things. I wanted to quote, I love, epigraphs, at the head of the book, head of the chapter, whatever. I wanted to have this thing, his famous statement was, it is well that war is so horrible, else we would come to love it too much. That always seemed some kind of elliptical thing, if war was a little less horrible, then we would love it more. It seemed to me, maybe it was drones he was foreseeing. I don't know. Or maybe he was warning us against big-time college football. I don't know. But I wanted that quote, that famous quote. Well, that war is so horrible, else we would come to love it more. And then right under that, a quote from Flannery O'Connor from The Misfit in A Good Man is Hard to Find. And the quote was, "Shut up, Bobby Lee, it's no real pleasure in life." I thought that seemed to me so cool, but I spent 4 years writing a book in order to have those epigraphs. Because the Bobby Lee in that story, The Misfit, of course, is a serial murderer who wipes out a whole family. It's a really funny story. And he's driven by, he says, if Jesus was who he said he was, then it's nothing to do but give up everything and follow him. And if he didn't say what he wasn't what he said he was, then it's nothing to do but just kill everybody, just pure meanness. Nothing, no pleasure in life but meanness, said the Misfit. Somehow or another that really resonated with me. I mean, I'm always trying to acknowledge something like that, something like all the meanness in the world, and somehow without, being too slick and too easy about the meanness, somehow jacking the meanness up into comedy, somehow or another. Flannery O'Connor was a genius at it. Anyway, so, but, now people say, oh, he must be a real Southerner. He wrote about the fucking Confederate general. He must love Confederates. I don't love Confederates. But I did find that I felt sorry for Robert E. Lee, actually. He was a neglected child who had to look after his mother because his father was so irresponsible. So anyway, I don't know that. But anyway, there's something about undermining yourself that excites me. And I think that's because there's something worth mining down there. You know what I mean? Up under yourself, not trying to, do good for yourself, but trying to find out what's underneath yourself and getting down in that stuff and trying to get comedy out of it. So with that in mind, that's part of the pressure I feel, which I think comes out of Georgia. And I'm going to read the first section of, the other thing I was going to say about my mother, I'm sorry, Sam, we're going through all this stuff, is just that we had a big argument when I was already living in New York, and there was a big family argument. And I went down to settle things once in a while, just sort of get in a fight. I mean, not in a fight, but, come on, let's just talk these things through. I went down in the middle of the night, went down to my mother and Susan and my father were there, and we had this big argument. Didn't do any good at all, but at the end of it, my mother said, "You have ripped out my heart and stomped on it on the kitchen floor." We were in the kitchen, and that's what I think. It was, and my whole notion is that if you push that just a little further and say, "You have ripped out my heart and stomped on it on the kitchen floor that I just finished mopping." That's what I think I've always been doing, is pushing in all respect and love. My mother, just one notch further. Okay, this is the beginning of my book, Crackers. It's called The Invocation. I don't know about you, but I have this voice that goes, "What? No, that ain't no way to write a damn sentence. That's the limpest damn, piddliest damn, saddest looking, most clogged and whiny damn, hitching around, pissing, corruption covered damn sentence I ever saw. Boy, anybody can snuffle along through the pine straw. I want to see you down with your teeth in the dirt, reaching and gnawing and chewing and gnashing on some oak tree roots. Right on down through to where the juice is. Get it, drive, show me something. Wait a minute. Just look at that. You proud of that sentence? You want your mama and daddy to read that sentence? You want your son or daughter to trustingly come upon that sorry-ass sentence someday buried way back deep in the public library and have to say, my daddy wrote that? My daddy wrote that poor shitty sentence sitting there with no more grain or solace in it than an old damn half-cooked, canned, sleazy, puffy-ass, artificial, goddamn depressing looking so-called biscuit? Huh? God damn. Scratch that out. Scratch some more out. Stick your head in there and scratch. Dig. Bear down. I know you. You afraid you're going to have to say something hard. You afraid you're not going to be able to say something hard. I told you you wouldn't be able to call on the stuff you need right now to write that sentence right if you picked it up the trashy, half-ass way you did. Reach back for it, and it ain't there, is it? Huh? What'd I tell you, boy? You can't suck no blood from a dead squirrel. No. Oh, you just flailing and wallowing. No, drive. No, move. No, hit. No. Scratch, dig, heave. No, do it again. I can't pin down the source of that voice in my case. It probably has various coaches and sergeants in it, and Mrs. Methvin, my 5th grade teacher, and the Old Testament. My daddy never spoke to me that way. As far as I know, he never said damn. But he grew up in the hard-scrabble South and was hard to impress. What I know is I grew up pissing that voice off constantly, and just as constantly being lifted by mysterious updrafts. I grew up in Georgia. President Jimmy Carter grew up in Georgia. Surely he too must hear that voice, must feel those surges. So why has his administration been identified with shilly-shally and polls? Why does the first president from my home state keep bringing me mortifying clashes of myself achieving popularity in the 7th grade and losing it? Why? What did I do? I was still the same little old boy in the 8th grade. You may not realize how rousing a moment it was for me ethnically when Daddy King stood up there in Madison Square Garden in 1976 at the behest of a by God country white Southerner and led all the states in singing We Shall Overcome. A Southern Baptist simple-talking, peanut warehousing, grit-eating, Italian saying cracker had gotten the strongest and most nearly progressive party to nominate him for president of the United States. He had won the trust of Dr. Martin Luther King's daddy, lieutenant, and spiritual constituency, and he had had a white hat popped on him by the national media. George Wallace, Richard Daley, George McGovern, and who knows, probably Huey Long and Daniel Webster were up there with Daddy King and Jimmy singing to the nation a revolutionary soul power song. Woo, mercy! I was sitting in Manhattan watching this great musical event on TV with my Georgia sister Susan, my Massachusetts wife Joan, my New York friends Roland and Lois Betts, my interracial goddaughter Margaret, and my brother-in-law Gerald Duff, who's from East Texas. It was Gerald who sounded the right note for the Southerners among us. Even though we were all brought up clean and decent, even though when the Ku Klux Klan came down the aisle of my great-granddaddy's church and deposited a bag of money in with the collection, my great-granddaddy picked it up and handed it back to them. And even though Gerald had just returned from a year of teaching English in England, even so, Gerald hit the right note, I think, when he sprang up from the sofa and hollered, "We ain't trash no more." Jimmy has provided a few other high points since then. This book came out in just before Jimmy Carter was defeated, second administration, second election. A few more high points since then, like when Menachem Begin told him, "You have written your name in the history of two ancient peoples." Think of it, Salome, Cheops, and old Jimmy. I nearly cried. And early in the Iran hostage crisis, when Jimmy was coming on as the head of a more mature civilization than Persia, that was something. Furthermore, I will defend Jimmy on many of what have been perceived as his low points. The goddamn rabbit incident, for instance. I don't know. There's a big story about that. He was out canoeing and a rabbit tried to get in his boat and he fought the rabbit off. Still, I have had a hard time figuring out what he has been up to overall. He is from my own state and I have trouble telling where he is coming from. I want him to show him. I want him to show me. I want him to demonstrate how a Georgia person can get down and chew the roots. Former Governor Marvin Griffin is an old segregationist who couldn't lead the nation in singing Turkey in the Straw. But he hit it about right when he told me in the course of my researches, Jimmy is like the feller who is wearing a blue serge suit and he pees in it. He has a warm feeling, but nobody else knows what is going on. I am from Georgia and I am determined to decipher what has been going on. Decipher it preferably in a way that makes me proud. I come from people who have been blithely called rednecks, crackers, white trash, snopes, and peckerwoods. People who have been put down from without and within. I want vindication. Well, I mean, some vindication. I'm not saying, what? Listen to you. Boy, damn, that ain't no way to write the goddamn invocation.
Roy, if you take a question or two, if anyone has one.
I got a question.
I do.
Yeah, sure.
Robert E. Lee.
There you
I was
go.
so disappointed that there are no Robert E. Lees out there. This one
Oh,
came
copies of that book. There's no Robert E. Lee's anywhere anymore.
This one came from Washington and Lee. In fact, I bought all they had.
Yeah, it's full price at Washington.
15. And there's a lady who knows you very well. I live on the east side of Athens. We've been neighbors for almost 40 years. She's known you since you were young. Caroline Burks. She
Oh, yeah.
probably says you don't remember her.
No, I
She
don't.
lived on Nelson Ferry Road. She looked down to see your house. Skip and Olivia Reed,
Yeah, certainly.
Jeannie Martha, and your parents were Louise and Roy Blount.
That's right.
I gave this to her for her birthday.
Oh, that's awful.
And I am delighted to know that Robert E. Lee had small feet.
Yeah.
And I gave
Bet you.
away my copy to my son-in-law. It's in his classroom up at Jefferson Middle School.
Oh.
So, and there's
There
no
should be
copies.
one in every American home.
I want more copies
Good.
of it. There are not any around here. Does anybody know of any more around here? So the ladies, and guaranteed that maybe we can get some, because I want you to write a note in this to Caroline.
Okay.
She will be here, but there's some issues right now. And her bill has died, but anyhow, she was
I'm
just
sorry.
fascinated and has looked forward to coming. But
I'm sorry. Well, tell her that I'm sorry she didn't come.
I wish you could take time and go visit. It's not far away. She should know you since you were before you became famous.
Next time I'm in town.
Welcome to the South.
You have become Yankee eyes.
Yeah, I'm sold out there. Anybody else? Yeah, yeah.
In a few days, we may have a first hubby. I'm just wondering if you could speculate on the difference between truth and fiction. Do you think it's going to be stranger than your novel?
I wrote this novel called First Hubby, which is narrated by the husband of the first woman president. And I think that, I hope Bill, in fact, if you want to know my naked opinion, is that I hope that Bill Clinton will be the first male first lady. way of getting in trouble. I don't know. Yeah, mine was, my narrator was a little crankier than he was. I think that, that truth is stranger than fiction. I'm not the first person to say that, but it's certainly not as neat as fiction. And who knows what'll happen. But I'm interested in seeing how well Bill will adapt to this new role. It's hard. I mean, Hillary's got a lot of things to deal with, and that's one of them. Yeah.
What's the next book?
I don't know. What's the next book you want me to write? I don't know. I don't have another book. I just have a paperback coming out of my book about food called Save Room for Pie. That's my most recent book, and it's out coming out paperback in March. Maybe they'll reissue, in fact, First Hubby. There's some talk of reissuing First Hubby because of, in light of the possible new presidency. Yeah.
I heard that you also went up north to school to Harvard, and
Yeah.
I think heard you mention microaggression in a radio interview, and I thought that was fascinating.
So, y'all know about microaggressions. Little things you're not supposed to say anymore that seem harmless but are perceived as insults. And some of them I'm saying, the one thing that you're not supposed to say to black people that are called black people articulate. And I understand that because I was a sports writer, and sports writers often refer to black athletes as articulate. They never refer to white athletes as articulate. It's like they didn't expect black athletes to be able to pronounce certain
And you were the recipient.
Yeah,
in
but
the north.
I get one microaggression is when people ask me when my next book is coming. Also, frankly, I find microaggression is being called sir. Once I was called pops. I don't like, and also, and a lot of southern microaggression. Yeah.
What's your favorite library?
My favorite library, well, right here is a good one. This is great. The storage down there, I don't know whether you've seen the collection down here, it's just amazing. It's great to be here. I'm New York Public Library. I've got a whole lot of material I could lay on you about appearing at the New York Public Library. But, I know it's good. I'll tell you right quick a story from New York Public Library, which was, my wife has heard this story so many times. You want to tell it? One thing, they had this thing called the Literary Lines, New York Library Literary Lines. They had 20 authors a year. It wasn't, you didn't get to be an immortal, but you did get to be a literary line. And every year they would, and then at the 10th year, they had all what were left. I mean, we lost a few, but quite a number of literary lines. They had a big 20th anniversary. I guess there's 10 a year, so like 200, nearly 200 literary lines appearing at this huge banquet. And they had us all, Meryl Streep once said that, addressed the Yale graduating class and said, you're leaving college now, and you'll find that the real life is not like college. Real life is like high school. Sometimes the literary life is like grammar school a little bit, because, for instance, we had all of us literary lines lined up. It was like being lined up outside the lunchroom. We were lined up before we were about to be introduced into the big hall where people paid a lot of money to have dinner with us. We were lined up, and we were lined up in alphabetical order. Maybe by height would have been more interesting. We were lined up in alphabetical order, which meant that I was between Harold Bloom and Judy Bloom. went with Judy, but Harold and I just didn't hit it off. And so does Oliver. And this was happening all up and down the line, so you had actually, you know, bees wandering off and talking to jays. And there was a guy in charge of sending us out into the big military dining hall, and he was saying, "People, I can't do this." You know, we had a football. He was trying to get us on, so, you know, and he would try to shush us. You know, he's being shushed if you're a literary line. Get back in the alphabetical order. And he was sending everybody out this way. He's holding. And the B, I went out pretty early, and he went out in this big literary hall, and I knew what table I was supposed to go to, so I was headed. And I heard the voice of Barbara Walters saying, "And now, a humorist, novelist." Oh, that's cool. Barbara Walters knows I wrote a novel. I just wrote one, but you know, and she said, incidentally, a very good cook. Couldn't figure that out because you know, I can cook a little bit. I cook for children. They probably would argue my children are here. Maybe one of my children is here. And might argue because she would only eat white things, white and yellow. But anyway, I can cook a little bit. But I can't, you know, I can't imagine the kind of cooking that Barbara Walters would expect. But the main thing was I could not remember ever having cooked for Barbara Walters. I mean, I thought this was the first time I'd ever seen Barbara Walters in the flesh. And I mean, I have forgotten some things. I've done some things that I've forgotten. One morning, I woke up in New Orleans in a hotel room and walked into the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and there was this huge gap of dried blood in the middle of my forehead. And I looked at it and I said, I've got to change my way of living. Because I remember some things from last night, but for the life of me, can't remember getting shot. Especially if you're a writer. You know, you need to remember things like no point getting shot if you don't remember what it is. But then I looked close, turned on the light, looked closer, and I had not, in fact, been shot. I had just slept on my complimentary mint. But I couldn't imagine forgetting cooking for Barbara Walters until she continued by saying, Nora Ephron. It went all like that all the way through the alphabet. Tony Randall, this is dating me, Tony Randall came out and took over the second half of the alphabet, and he called them all, everybody was wrong. And at one point he said, George Plimpton, and a little Indian woman was. Literary recognition is not always what it's cracked up to be. But this was, and I appreciate it.
Wonderful to hear from our Georgia Literary Lion and a great cook, Roy Blount Jr. So tonight's event is part of Spotlight on the Arts at the University of Georgia. There's actually more than 100 events and exhibitions and programs going on across the university, and the performing and the visual, and our favorite, the literary arts. And if you go to arts.uga.edu, you can see a complete rundown of those. We have a reception just after tonight's event, so please come out and enjoy that. And let's have one more round of applause for Roy Blount Jr.